We've all heard the phrase, history is written by the victors. But let's be honest, that's more than just a catchy saying. It's a quiet confession. It's an admission that the story we're told is never the whole story. It means that for every hero immortalized in stone, there are countless others left in the shadows. Their contributions downplayed, their names forgotten, and their legacies buried. And we're not talking about minor characters here. Many of these people literally changed the world. They were architects of progress, scientific pioneers, and champions for freedom. Their brilliance reshaped our society in ways we still feel today. So, why don't we know their names? Because history isn't just written. It's edited. It's curated. And in that process, some of our greatest heroes got cut. Their stories were seen as inconvenient, their identities too challenging, and their brilliance too threatening to the people in charge. What if I told you that some of history's greatest heroes weren't just forgotten, but that the very history they helped create turned its back on them, leaving their families with nothing but silence and struggle? This isn't just about correcting a few dusty textbooks. This is about uncovering a profound injustice that is still happening today. Because the real story isn't just that these heroes were forgotten. It's how they and their families are really being treated. Section 1. The Immortal Woman Who Never Gave Consent. In 1951, a young black mother of 5 named Henrietta Lacks went to Johns Hopkins Hospital for cervical cancer treatment. During a biopsy, a doctor took a sample of her cancer cells. He did it without her knowledge and without her consent. Now, taking samples wasn't unusual back then, but what happened next was, Henrietta's cells did something no human cells had ever done before in a lab. They didn't die. They just kept doubling, every 24 hours, creating the first ever immortal human cell line. They were codenamed HeLa, and they became one of the most important tools in modern medicine. HeLa cells were crucial for developing the polio vaccine. They've been used to understand cancer, AIDS, and the effects of radiation. They've played a role in genetic mapping, IVF, and even the development of COVID-19 vaccines. The medical breakthroughs they've enabled have saved countless lives and contributed to over 11,000 research publications. Meanwhile, Henrietta Lacks, the woman behind this miracle, died in agony just months after her diagnosis. She was buried in an unmarked grave. For decades, her own children had no idea that a part of their mother was not only alive, but was the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar medical industry. They struggled to get by, sometimes unable to afford the very healthcare their mother's cells helped revolutionize. This is the first layer of how forgotten heroes are treated. It's not just erasure, it's exploitation. For over 70 years, corporations bought, sold, and profited from Henrietta's cells. It wasn't until 2021 that her family filed a lawsuit against a major biotech company, arguing it was still unjustly profiting from what was taken from her. In 2023, the family reached a confidential settlement. And while it was seen as a moment of justice, it came after more than 70 years of struggle. A lifetime where the world benefited from her sacrifice, while her family was left fighting for recognition. Section 2. The Architect Forced into the Shadows. In August 1963, 250,000 people gathered for the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was one of the most iconic moments of the civil rights movement, a logistical masterpiece that changed the course of American history. And it never would have happened without one man, Bayard Rustin. Rustin was the chief organizer, the strategic genius behind the whole thing. He was a brilliant activist who had studied Gandhian nonviolence and was a close advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., teaching him the very principles that would define the movement. He should have been standing right there with Dr. King on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, recognized as a central architect of the day. But he wasn't. Bayard Rustin was forced to work from the shadows. Why? Because he was an openly gay man in an era of intense homophobia. Political rivals threatened to use his sexuality to smear the entire movement and derail the march. Fearing the fallout, other civil rights leaders asked him to take a background role, So the man who organized the march wasn't allowed to be its face. His name was barely mentioned. His role was deliberately minimized to protect the movement from the bigotry of the time. And that's the next layer of this mistreatment. Marginalization. Rustin's genius was valuable enough to be used, but his identity was considered too dangerous to be seen. For decades, history books and documentaries barely mentioned him. It wasn't until 2013 that he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and in 2020, he was pardoned for a 1953 conviction related to his sexuality. This recognition was vital, but it came far too late. For most of his life, and for decades after his death, one of the sharpest minds of the civil rights movement was treated like a secret. Section 3. The Liberator erased by a lost cause. On the night of May 13, 1862, in the middle of the Civil War, an enslaved man named Robert Smalls pulled off one of the most daring escapes in American history. Smalls was a pilot on a Confederate ship called the Planter. While the white officers were ashore, Smalls, who had memorized all the Confederate naval signals, put on the captain's hat and took command. He gathered his family and other enslaved crew members and sailed the heavily armed ship right past 5 Confederate forts, giving the correct signals at each one. He delivered the ship, its cannons, and its valuable intel to the Union blockade, winning freedom for himself and 15 others. His heroism made him a legend in the North. He even met with President Lincoln to argue for allowing black men to fight for the Union. He went on to serve in the Union Navy, becoming the first black captain of a U.S. service vessel. After the war, he returned to his hometown of Beaufort, South Carolina, bought the house of the man who had enslaved him, and was elected to 5 terms in the U.S. Congress. Robert Smalls was a hero and a founding father of a new, more inclusive America. His success should have been a symbol of the promise of Reconstruction. But then the story turned. This is the third way heroes get erased: systematic suppression. When Reconstruction ended, the racist ideology of the lost cause began to take over. The achievements of black leaders like Robert Smalls were actively dismantled and scrubbed from history. His incredible story of bravery and political success completely contradicted the narrative of white supremacy, so it was buried. For nearly a century, his legacy was largely forgotten, treated as an inconvenient truth. Only recently has his story been resurrected, with a statue now planned for him on the grounds of the South Carolina State House, a place surrounded by monuments to the very men he fought against. The stories of Henrietta Lacks, Bayard Rustin, and Robert Smalls aren't just sad anecdotes. They're a pattern. It's a pattern of exploitation, where a person's body can fuel an industry while their family gets nothing. It's a pattern of marginalization, where a hero's mind is put to work, but their identity is hidden away. And it's a pattern of suppression, where a legacy that challenges a comfortable myth simply gets erased. This is how forgotten heroes are really treated. It's not a passive act of forgetting. It's an act of injustice. It's the cruel irony of Henrietta Lacks' family fighting for health care while her cells made fortunes. It's the painful silence around Bayard Rustin's name at the very march he created. It's the deliberate burial of Robert Smalls' story to make way for a false history. The result is that our shared history is incomplete, full of holes where our heroes ought to be, leaving us with a warped idea of who we are and what we can achieve. Conclusion. Setting the record straight isn't just about adding a few names to a textbook. It's an act of justice. It's about finally acknowledging that the price of progress was often paid by people who were never credited, let alone compensated. Their contributions helped build the world we live in, but their legacies were paved over. So the question is, how many more heroes are still out there, waiting in margins? How many brilliant and courageous souls have been written out of the story? And maybe the most important question of all, what does it say about us if we decide to stop looking for them? The story of our past isn't finished. It's our job to keep turning the pages, to find the names that were crossed out, and to tell their stories loud enough for everyone to hear. If you believe these stories need to be told, subscribe for more history that sets the record straight.